Boom. Let's try that. Okay, sweet. So a couple things real quick I want to point out. Here on the course schedule, there's lab policies and procedures. Everyone should be able to get into the lab using their BUID, but there's information about it. I think the only thing that's outdated is you do not need masks in here. But otherwise, there's the hours and times. You access these areas with your key card on weekends and at night. So you want to check that in advance. If your key card doesn't work, and I've found about one person in each class where for whatever reason their BUID doesn't work, email me your BUID and say, hey, it doesn't work for 405, and I'll send that on to security. Cool. So everybody will use that to be able to get in. Several people have asked about how they could have Photoshop or have all these apps on their own computer or at home to be able to work on rather than come in. So I did want to point out that the Creative Cloud is available to students for 20 bucks a month or that amount for a year. That said, you can install it on up to 2 computers. You just both can't be using it at the same time. I've known a lot of students that have done that. They've just split the cost and both, they use one account and then they just can install it on both their computers. They just don't do their homework at the exact same time. And actually, I think if you open it up and then you shut off the internet or you just turn off your Wi-Fi, then it actually, you can continue to use it even theoretically at the same time. So yes, Harry.
So if it is on 2 computers on the same deal, you're on the internet?
Yes, because it will go out and check on the internet. So, yep. Yeah, but that is a pretty affordable way. I've known lots of people that have essentially split the cost. They're spending 40 bucks and they have access to all the software on both their computers for the whole semester. So, so that is certainly an option you can pursue. Otherwise, the lab is available at all of those other hours. So let's see, I wanted to throw that out there. And then last, I wanted to share this one thing because I ran into a couple of students that were not completely clear on the value of like making sure that you're doing all your own work. So I need to see everybody's eyes. I had dinner with several friends last night that I've been friends with for a long time. We've produced a lot of content together, albums, videos. One went on to a TV show. The others created products that have made him very rich. But in that process, when I was working with one of them on a big series 10 or 15 years ago, he wanted to produce this really long instructional series on guitar. And so the person he'd hired to actually teach it and write the curriculum, and I was doing the video production, but he hired him and said, hey, just make sure you use only public domain songs so we don't have to go through all the licensing requirements to be able to use like any other songs. There's lots of songs out there. Use those for this initial one, and then we can do other videos later that use more modern licensed songs. So the instructor jumped on the internet and Googled a list of public domain songs that you don't have to pay copyright on and found that list, and that was his list. Turns out not everything you read on the internet is 100% accurate. And one of those songs was not public domain. So about 2 or 3 years into where this course was selling like crazy, he was making lots of good money on it. He got an email or a letter from the publishing company that owned that song, maybe one of whose employees had bought the course, or a lot of times companies like that that own a lot of copyrights, they have people specifically checking out anything that's doing well. If there's a product that's selling a lot or at the top of the search results, guess what? They're going to go double check it for their work. They found their song in it. They took him to court. He said it ultimately cost him about $500,000. That one mistake of using somebody else's work. Now, that's a comparatively like modest judgment. If you did that on network television or broadcast, well, if you're working with a company like that, they have people double checking things that you are not using something that belongs to somebody else. If you do that, you will absolutely be fired. So I say all of that to say, everything in here has to be your own work. Part of the reason I designed the project so that you integrate some of your own things in it is so that you can't copy one another's work. Not because I think most people do that, most of you don't. But sometimes it's like, ooh, I'm out of time. And so like, let me just try to knock this out or work with a friend to do something. So quizzes, tests, those are all things you take on your own. You don't look at somebody else's answers afterwards. And obviously you do your own work in Photoshop and stuff too, and all the products, because there's no other way to learn them. But moreover, because if you build the habit of like, I'm just going to use somebody else's stuff now, it will absolutely bite you in the ass really hard later, as happened to my friend. And it wasn't even his fault, but I think the lesson he told me that he learned was, if he had, in that first year or two, as it was starting to really start selling a lot, if he had then just gone back and double checked, just pay a copyright lawyer $1,000 to just double check, make sure that we don't have anything in here that doesn't belong to us. Somebody like that would have turned up, oh, hey, you've got this song in here. And what could he have done? Well, throw away the rest of the DVDs he had, re-edit that one little bit and print new ones. Would have cost him a lot less money. So anyway, just keep that in mind. Yes, Michaela. Uh-huh. Yep. That's okay. If you're doing your own work side by side, that's okay. But like quizzes, those are obviously supposed to be a test of your own knowledge, not can you read off of your friend's tests that they already completed. But then if you're doing your own work, that's okay too. So it's all about you putting in the work. Cool. All right. So I did want to point those things out and the lab availability and talk about the project. Here underneath the course, Project 2, Photoshop Editing Instructions, I've told you about my experience working with Photoshop and how when I first dove in, I spent a month going through about 15 hours of tutorials, doing everything that they did, clicking every button. And as a result, by the end of that month, I had a foundational knowledge of Photoshop that I've been able to use ever since. If there's something I don't know how to do, usually it's a quick YouTube video or a LinkedIn course away that then educates me on some new feature. And as a result, then that's all I need. Now, if you're going to use Photoshop all day, every day, sure, you want to keep working on it. But in terms of being able to do quick layouts, straightforward. So we're going to go through, and as a result, today, and of course, you guys are working through a lot of tutorials outside of class. And today we're going to go through and, like last time, go outside of the tutorials. We'll open up a tutorial image, but show you how to do other things. But then your project is to choose 8 different tutorials from different categories out of any of those tutorials, from creative effects or photo editing. And after you're completing them, you're going to bring in some of your own images and repeat the process. So we're going to walk through 1 or 2 of those today, bringing in our own images so that you can have this understood, as well as some of the differences you'll run into. So then you'll put your 8 images in a blog post in the same way you already know. So for example, there's a screenshots, Shift Command 3 or Shift Control Command 3 to copy and paste. And here, for example, is an example. So here's the tutorial it was. Here is my original image. Here's the original image in Photoshop completed, including so I can see what layers you had, and then the final image in and of itself. Okay, so straightforward. You're going to go through, you get to pick, but they need to be from different categories. So it's going to help you sample through. So you've already worked through probably 10 or 15 tutorials up till now. If those you start to get really comfortable, you could jump back through and use a couple of those. And then as you go through more, and then there's some I won't require for class, but you can choose from those if you want to just continue to expand your skills. Cool. So let's dive back into and start actually working on a few more of these tools so that we've got this in place. Let's see, save, close, save, close, save. All right. So go ahead and under the help menu, open those hands-on tutorials. And I think last time we picked up with the get to know layer masks, where we went through and we took a photo of this woman that was stacked over a photo of this cat. And then we added a layer mask. And we masked out part of the woman's face to be able to bring back in the cat. So if you don't have that open, go to Help, Hands-On Tutorials, and I think that's in Orientation. Nope, it's in Select and Mask. And you can go and open that one back up. Nope, where's it at? Where's Tiger Face Lady? Must be in those originals. There it is, Get to Know Layer Masks. Okay, so go open that one up. Tutorials. All right, here we go. Now, I just need the Photoshop file for this. We're not going to go back through this tutorial because we've already done it before. But I do want to save this as its own Photoshop document so we can use that as the foundation for adding in our own image and doing this thing. So we've got this picture here. So what I want to do right off the bat is go to File and Save As. You're going to get this Save to Creative Cloud. And I don't want to save it to the Creative Cloud. I want to save it on my computer. Now navigate to either your hard drive or the desktop. I'm going to go and click on here and go to the desktop, or Command D will take us to the desktop. And you can see I've actually gone ahead and clicked new folder, made myself a folder for these files. And then I'm going to go ahead and save this as 1450 last name, get to know layer masks. Just that way I can distinguish it. And you'll notice it's going to save this as a format Photoshop document. Once you've got to this point, throw me a thumbs up, move on. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry, my thing was like being weird.
It's okay. So you're going to want to, once you've got the tutorial open, you got that, Hannah? Okay, so File, Save As, or Shift Command S. We want to tell it to save on our computer, so I'm not going to save it in the cloud, so I'm going to say on my computer, and then you can save it wherever you want. So, but that way you can open it up later. This could conceivably work as one of your 8 required tutorials today if you go through it step by step with us, but you need to be able to save it. So I'm going to save it to the desktop, and I've already made a folder there with this new folder button, and I'm just going to save it with any name so that I can find it. It doesn't matter to me what you name these because you won't actually turn in the Photoshop files. You're just going to turn in screenshots of the finished work. Get to know layer masks. All right, so that should be here, and I can close out the tutorial. When you close out the tutorial, it will close out the image though as well. That's by design here on purpose. So once you close the tutorial, everybody's screen should essentially get blank. Is that what you got? And you close the little Discover tutorial window box. Okay. Did everybody close out the tutorial itself? So essentially we just opened the tutorial so that we could get that file to work with. And then we did a save as, gave it our own name, and then we closed the little tutorial box. Sweet. You've just got another one open up here, so you can close that one. You just had a blank new document. All right, so now the beauty of it is, since we just saved that file, it's actually the most recent file that we've used. So if you go to File, Open Recent, you will see that whatever file you just had open and named is now right there on the screen, ready to go. So click on File, Open Recent, and you're going to have it open, ready for work. Right, that's what I just sent you down. So now go with File, Open Recent. It's just going back to home instead of so go to Open Recent. And get the layer masks, saved. Beautiful, yes. So anytime you close out a document, it should still be in there in the Open Recent. So it's very easy to get back to. Now we need to pull in the last one. You don't need to follow along with these steps, but let me just remind you, we wanted to show the cat layer beneath the woman layer. And so we needed to mask or remove this part of the woman's face so that the cat layer showed through. Now there's a couple things we can do here. First off, we would add a layer mask. That's down here in the lower right-hand corner. It's got this little mask and it'll say apply layer mask. And then we also saw that we can use our brush tool. So brush tool was accessed with what key? The letter B. But then I need to make sure of where I'm painting. Every question I got last hour where somebody said, it's not doing what you say, it's because they were either on a different layer than what we were supposed to be on, or they had, look at my screen, people are not looking at my screen, or they had the image selected rather than the mask. So looking at and saying, okay, what is it I'm trying to do and what should be selected right now is going to be the simplest way to solve most problems. So with that layer mask selected, Melody, when the mask is white, what will it do? If the mask, all the pixels that are white will show what? Nope. Right now you see it's white and we can see all of the layer. If they paint them black, then it shows through. It makes those pixels transparent. So if I want to paint with black here, we had foreground and background colors. Currently those are black and white. If we had them as a different color, then we can reset them with this little reset or the default colors with the shortcut D. And if we want to switch between black and white, we can either click this little arrow or we can just hit what key? X. So if I want to paint with black, I switch that to the foreground color. And then as I paint around, all of a sudden, it makes that part of the mask black, which shows through to whatever is beneath it. So where the mask is black, you'll see what's beneath. Where it's white, you see the same layer. Now, the other thing we learned how to do was resize our brushes so we could fill in smaller areas, because if your brush is too big, it's very difficult to get small areas because it just paints too much. But now if I did too much of it, how would I quickly switch back to white to paint out that X? So I switch back to white, and now I can paint around. I can shrink my brush down, and I can make that nice and clean. And if I want to switch it back, X again, lets me fill in those little hairlines. So you're constantly, when you're doing this, you're constantly resizing your brush. You're constantly switching back and forth between black and white, and you can quickly mask this out. Now, last time I had you go and email or download a photo of yourself. Go ahead and go find that photo that you've either emailed to yourself or downloaded. Because now we've learned how to do this simple tutorial. We're going to put in one of our own images and be ready to go. So throw me a thumbs up when you've pulled in one of your own images. Okay, looking around. Everyone getting their image downloaded? Cool. Hold your hand up if you've already got an image ready to go. I don't want to leave people behind. I think you could also still use Photo Booth, the Photo Booth app, if only for today's purposes. If you open that up, you can look right on the camera. Grab that screenshot, and you can actually, I think, just right click on it and choose Export. And I'll just call this test pic on the desktop. I don't think I'm going to use that one. I'm going to stick with this one. All right, who's got a picture ready to go? Okay, now how do we pull your own images into this? Well, here's several different things that you should know. First, over here in Photoshop, which layer it's going to actually end up on, whether it appears above these layers or below these layers, is kind of up to us. I'm going to deselect all layers by simply just clicking anywhere in the empty space. So there's no layers selected. And then I'm going to go find that image of mine and drag and drop it directly into my Photoshop document. And it should put it above the other layers as long as nothing is selected. So dragging and dropping your photo in is going to put it in here with the transform mode active so we can resize and scale it. You do have to hit enter or return to accept that currently transformed size and lose those handles before you're able to actually save it. So I hit the return key. I'm going to actually, for the video recording. Good, I'm going to put these up here. There's my shortcuts. All right, so now we need to obviously resize this so that it's about the same size and my eyeballs are lined up with hers. So I'm going to actually hide the cat, and temporarily I'm going to hide this woman layer. So hold down the shift key and click on the layer mask, and that's going to turn off that layer mask for a second. So if I was trying to repeat this process with my own picture, I've dragged and dropped or copied and pasted my picture into the document. I look over and I make sure I can see it here. I've got it. I named mine Nathan Photoshop Tiger. But now, how do I resize this and try to line our eyeballs up? Michaela. You could, but if I put it in transform and I try to adjust it, I can't really see what it looks like behind. So the beautiful thing is with this layer selected, my layer, let's make it, you'll notice we have this option to change its opacity. So you can either click on the word opacity and just drag left and right, or you can click on that number and you can drag, but I'm just going to pull the opacity down a little bit of that layer so I can see both of our eyes. Then put it in transform mode and resize until our eyeballs are lined up. Now what I like to do is put our noses together. So I'm actually going to like line our noses up. And then do we remember what modifier key to hold down so that when you drag and scale, it scales around the center? And remember? If you just hold one corner, if you have no modifier keys, it scales from the opposite corner. But if you hold the option key down, it actually scales around the center. So I'm going to scale this up until our eyeballs are aligned. And I notice my eyes are actually, my head was tilted a little bit more. So I'm going to rotate this slightly so our eyeballs line up. So I'm going to come over to the side here. And when I hover outside of an image in transform mode, I get this little curved line, which allows me to rotate this. And I'm going to try to line those eyeballs up. Now it's creating this weird blend of our faces. And once I hit return, that accepts it. That is wild. I'm going to go ahead and switch this opacity back to 100%. So theoretically, my eyeballs are lined up with where hers are right now. Everybody do the same. All right, so now that we've got that in place, we can tell there's several adjustments we're going to need to make, but I'm going to just hide her image. So I'm going to turn that off, turn back on the cat beneath, and repeat the process. Which layer do I need to apply a mask to? Anybody? Yep, my layer, because I want to mask out my eyeballs so that the cat comes through. So I'm going to go apply a layer mask, switch to which tool so I can paint on black. My brush tool with the B key, I'm going to go and double check and make sure that the brush tool is selected, not the pencil or color replacement or mixer brush. So click and hold down and make sure you've got the brush tool. And I'm going to use my X key to switch between black and white so that which color is up front, which color I'm painting with? Black. And now as I start to paint over, I can see it was pretty close lined up. Not perfectly, but I can go in and get this nice match and adjust my brush size. And I can tell you, I'm not nearly as attractive as the previous model in this, but it works. Now, what if I needed to tweak this? Well, go ahead and you do yours. What if I needed to tweak this to make this match my eyes? I could, of course, select my image, put it back in transform mode, and try to scale that up a little bit more so it fits a little better, and then drag this down, and that actually works all right. I could always switch back to my brush tool, paint in a little bit more. Or hit the X key to switch back to white. If I was trying to be super precise here, I'd have to use a much smaller brush. I'd switch down to a very small brush, and I would come in and I would paint out all those little areas that I didn't want. There. Paint that out, and again, just using the white paint. Able to paint those things out. Command 0. All right. Who was able to do that okay? Sweet. All right, but we need to fix this because this image has some issues. We got lots of empty space here on the sides. The pictures didn't quite perfectly fit. Does everybody else have the same thing? Depending on your image or how you took it, it's probably not going to quite fit. So we need to be able to crop this down and recompose the image. So I'm going to crop this. And in order to do that, actually, I'm pausing. You okay? Hannah, getting it?
I hadn't gotten.
Are you getting it now?
Yes, I got it.
Okay, cool. All right, so now in order to crop this, we need to select, just like, let's select a square of it. Which tool lets us select a square? And remember, the marquee tool. So if we hit the M key, it goes to our marquee tool, which right now mine is set to the circular one, elliptical. So if I click and hold down, I can switch to the rectangular marquee tool and then come and quickly drag a square that actually catches inside the edges of all the boundaries. And now under my image menu, once you have a square selected, you can choose crop, and that will crop the canvas, which is basically the entirety of where you can create. So that cropped it down, and now I have this little image created using an image mask. How are we doing so far? Make sense? Now, up till now, let me point out a few other things. Number one is I don't want to leave anybody behind. How are we doing? Is there anybody that's catching up? Okay, go ahead and just select with your marquee tool with M, select over the parts of your image you want to keep, and then under the image menu, you can choose crop. All right, throw me a thumbs up when you're there. Feeling all right? You doing, Hannah? Getting there? Sweet. No apologies needed. Now, I do want to point some things out. Look up here at the tab open. You can have lots of Photoshop documents open. You can have multiple other images. For example, if I wanted to open up this image by itself in Photoshop, I can actually come to it. I can right-click on it and choose Open with Photoshop. And that'll open up that image directly in Photoshop, but now you see that that opens it as actually a second tab. We can see the name of it, and we can see how much it is zoomed right now. So for example, this one is 1450 Atom Get to Know Layer Masks. Currently it's zoomed to 66%. And then this over here on the side, this little asterisk says, hey, this has had changes made since you last saved. So if I save Command S, you'll see it says saving and that asterisk is gone. So if you see the asterisk, it means not all of your work has been saved yet. All right, so we've saved this file. I'm going to do this now though. If I jump back over to my desktop where I have this saved, and I find the file, 1450 Atom Get to Know Layer Masks, go and find your file on the computer too. If you're not sure how to find it, what's it called? Look at the name, Command Spacebar for Spotlight, and type that in, 1450 Atom Get to Know. And once you find it, Get to Know Layer Masks. Once you find it, you can hold down what key before hitting return to take you to it. Hold down what key? Where's your left thumb? The command key. Command return will take you straight to it. It's always good to just keep track of where it is, but you can always just use Command Spacebar and Spotlight, type in the exact name of it. Once you see that Photoshop document, Command return will take me straight to it. So I would heartily recommend that you keep that someplace safe. Now take a look at this. How big is this file and what kind is it? Well, we can see that here in detail view. If I was in this view, icon view, you actually really can't tell very easily. It looks like there's a bunch of images that are basically identical. You see this? But if I switch to this list view, I can see that what? This is the one that's named with the name I needed. When was it last modified or saved, Julia? At 11:30. How big is the file? 50.3 megabytes, and it's an Adobe Photoshop file. Now, this is what we call an edit format. So Photoshop obviously can keep layers, colors, effects, all sorts of things. They can get very, very big. But when we want to deliver this, we want to put it on the web, email it, just use it someplace, and we don't need to hang on, we don't need to have all those layers. We're going to go to File and Export, and we'll export a delivery format. Typically, this is going to be either a JPEG, a PNG file, or a GIF file. So a JPEG or a PNG will be the most common. PNG has become one of the most common on the web. So I'm going to click on Quick Export as PNG. It should ask me where I want to put it. I'm going to make sure it's putting it in the same place. So it's already chosen wherever my current project is, or my current Photoshop document, it's putting it in the same place, but it's going to name it with a .png file. When I hit save, I can go back and look, and now I have two different files, the Photoshop document version and the PNG version. Go export yours as a PNG. Raise a hand if you need help. I'll come back to you. All right, so you'll notice we have two files now, a PNG, and let's go with Ryan. What's the difference in size between the PNG and the Photoshop file? 3 megabytes, 50. So a massive difference. But if we look at them, I'm literally switching between them now, and you notice one says open in preview because it has no layers or any of that information yet. The other one is openable in Photoshop. So now that we've got our image, we would take our screenshots for the project and then put them in as we saw in the instructions. Questions about this? Okay, so that's how we would just essentially take one of the files, pull in our own image, and do the same thing. Let's look at another one. I'm going to go File, Open Recent. Let's say this one, change the background color. Okay, go back under the Help, Hands-on Tutorials, and under Select and Mask, let's grab this, change the background color in a photo. And we're going to actually take this a lot farther than they took it. So we're just using these tutorial photos, but we're going to use them for our own skills. So once you've got it, let's do a Save As, File, Save As on your computer. And this one was called what? I'm blanking on what this one was called. Change the background color, 1450, Atom, change BG color. And I'm going to save it. That way I can close the tutorial itself, but it's under the File, Open Recent, change background color. Okay, so now that we've got this, I've got my Adobe stock. This one only has 2 layers, the main photo layer and this other Adobe stock legal. I'm going to turn that one off visibility-wise. You'll notice it is locked. It's got this little lock icon. So I can select it and either click on the lock to turn that off, and I'm actually just going to go ahead and delete it. Okay, so one of the key things we need to be able to do is make selections in Photoshop, to the point that actually a lot of these tools right here are all about making specific selections, selecting specific things. So let's explore a few of them. We already looked at using something like the marquee tool. We looked at using the elliptical marquee tool to make circles, etc. But then we have a few others. I want you to see the value of each one. Let's say if I click on this lasso tool right below the marquee tool, you'll see there's 3 different lasso tool options. Okay, let's just explore what they do real quick. The lasso tool is just literally it's kind of the original tool. It's totally freehand, and you can click and drag around and you'll get a selection. Okay, so just click and drag around, you'll get a selection. Now, is that at all like adhering to the edges of our subject? Not at all. But we learned also to double check this. Number 1, that whatever I'm trying to affect, that I have the correct layer selected. Do you have the correct layer selected? Okay, so we double check that first. Second, I have you, instead of using these new selection, add selection, subtract selection modes, I have you just always stick with the new selection mode, right? Why? Because then we can use a modifier key to add to it. So let's say that this was the first selection that we had. We go, well, that's not right. In fact, I want you to make a selection that's clearly not right. Go ahead and make a selection that's clearly not correct. Not at all. I mean, it's got some of him. Okay, make sure that you're on the new selection mode. And now let's remove, I'm going to take this big piece that I didn't want, and I hold down which key so that my selection tool gets a little minus on it. Option. So if I hold that one down, now I could come through here and I'm just going to get closer and select around the part I don't want. And as soon as I let go, it will reconnect and it removes the part I didn't want. Now I could be very specific, very precise, use that option key and get closer and closer. And of course, I should do a lot of zooming in. But I just want to show you that that would be a quick way to fix any little errors that the automatic selection methods don't use. If I want to add to the selection, I hold down which key, which turns my selector into a plus, shift. So then I could click and drag around. So I could start to fix whatever parts were not selected that I wanted to. So practice with that, use the shift. You can do it little pieces at a time if you want. But I just want you to get comfortable with this because the tools now are good enough that it'll do a pretty good job if you use the right tool of our other magic tools, but oftentimes you'll still have to come back in and use the regular lasso or magnetic lasso tools to be able to select little pieces to fix what the automatic parts don't. Okay, pause what you're doing right there. Everybody's starting to feel comfortable with like select and add and select and subtract? Okay, good. We're not going to use that tool, but the lasso tool, it would allow us to go through and select things. The polygonal lasso tool is helpful if you have something with straight edges, because every time you click, it simply adds a point until you go back to the original and your icon will switch to having a little 0 instead of a plus. And so this is really good for selecting things if you want really hard-edged geometric shapes. Doesn't work in this case, but you see that we can keep adding to our selection. Try with that polygonal lasso tool. Helpful on occasion. Finally, let's deselect it all. Command D. And the last one that you can use is that magnetic lasso tool. And the magnetic tool, as you click and you drag, you'll see it does its best. If you're trying to get it right along an edge, it does its best to succeed with you. It's not always perfect, but it's trying to magnetically attach to the sides. And you can double click at any time to loop that back. I just wanted you to see what that does. But now I want to show you the fastest way to work with all this. Once you know those exist, I mostly only use those for actually fixing little errors that the automatic selections didn't do. Command D will deselect everything. Now the next ones are the magic. You have the object selection tool, the quick selection tool, and the magic wand. Object selection and quick selection have gotten very good. Here's how you do it. With quick selection tool, when you hover in the middle of something, let's say we want to select him, I can click and drag. And as I drag, you see that that will quickly select everything of similar pixel values around. So you can just draw through and you see it's trying to quickly select the clothes, the person, etc. Now the thing to be aware of is that if your brush is too big, like if my brush was this big, as I drag around, I might accidentally grab some of that pink. Or I might miss some of this shirt. So use that object selection, or not object, this is the quick selection. And then what would I do to fix that? Well, I could simply either hold my option key down. I usually want to make sure my brush is smaller than what I'm trying to select. But if I hold my Option key, you see that turns into a remove selection, and I can try to remove that selection, or I could switch to one of those lasso tools and lasso exactly what I want gone. If I want to add to it like this, I hold the Shift key down and I draw until it adds to that selection. Now, this is the tool that you'll probably use most of the time, especially if you're grabbing like a complicated thing like a person. Now, last one, Command D to deselect, and go up under the Select menu. You'll notice you've got a few very specific options. You can actually select a range of colors. So if you had, for example, a background with like a fence, but then there was blue sky behind it, going through and individually selecting every little piece of blue sky would take forever. But you could select a color range, and instead of this being pink right now, if I select this, you see it actually shows me what it's going to paint white and what it's going to paint black. And we would have to adjust some things here. That's outside of our preview for today. But if we simply select subject, if there's a really clear difference between the background and the foreground, select subject does a pretty dang good job nowadays of getting it. And then we could always switch to a lasso tool to actually fix or grab any little areas it missed or remove any areas where it added too much. So much of Photoshop is about making a good, clean selection of one thing, extracting it from one image, putting it into another. Okay, how are we doing so far? Now, with that selected, let's go ahead and mask out that background. So I'm going to use a mask, click the mask, and it paints everything that was inside of it white and everything that was outside of it black. That will make the background transparent. Does everybody have that? Okay, undo, Command Z, and let me teach you one other really valuable thing. Oftentimes, you might find, let's say that you just wanted to keep this pink background and eliminate him. Well, I've just made a selection, but if I add a mask, it's removing the background. If, however, I want, what I can do is sometimes I'll select the thing I don't want. And you notice right now, you see how the little marching ants, the dots are moving around the picture? Shift Command I, or under Selection, Inverse, Shift Command I, you'll see it looks similar, except now those marching ants are running around the outside. So now it has selected everything but him. And if you were to mask it now, you would see that it masks the outside with white, so that stays visible, but turns the inside of the selection black. Shift Command I to invert the selection again, and let's go ahead and mask. Shift Command I. Oh, I'm hitting Shift Option I. That's why it wasn't working. Shift Command I, and we've got this character. Okay, so go back and just mask out the background. Sweet. Now, let's say that this is your picture. Anyone in here can take a picture of themselves against a plain background and easily import it into Photoshop, and now you've got all the tools you need to cleanly remove yourself from the background. Has everybody got something like that right now? Okay, I won't have you go and do that with your own right now, but does everyone feel comfortable that you can pull in your own photo and select it and remove it? Great. Now let's say you want to take this and you want to turn this into like a banner for your website. So in this case, to do that, we would need this to be a lot wider than we currently have. So what we need to adjust is not the size of the image, it's the size of the canvas. So the canvas is what area we have to be able to work with. So that's under the image menu, canvas. And you'll see, okay, well, the canvas size currently is 1800 pixels across by 1200 pixels tall. So I'm going to come down here and let's just make it a little bit bigger. I'm going to make this 4000 pixels across, and I'll leave the height alone. Now these buttons down here let you determine where to keep the current content. If I said, we'll keep the current content on the left side, and I hit OK, you'll see that now the current content moved to the left. If I were to image canvas size, make it 4000 pixels wide, and anchor it to the lower right, it'll keep it anchored to the lower right. So however you want to do it, it doesn't really matter because yours is all going to look unique. But if you just leave it alone, it'll put it in the center. Switch back to your move tool with the V key, and I'm going to select my layer and move my image over to this side. Command 0 will zoom you out so you can see the whole thing. Okay, and let's go ahead and save since we've been working on this for a while. So when you're doing this, you would grab a picture of you doing your best pose, ideally maybe with some cool color pops like these glasses or those lips. Okay, how are we doing? Now let's build our own background. So this is our image of just our subject. So I'm going to click over here and add a new layer. Let's just click to add a new layer and rename it. Instead of layer 1, double click on that and rename it background. Okay, background is there. If I want this background to appear behind his image, I need to do what with it? Drag it below. Now, if we want to do a cool design, typically we'll want to connect it to the colors that are already in the image. So in this case, we've got some cool browns, we've got this purple, and we have these red lips. So in order to sample those colors and make those the foreground and background colors, I would use what tool? Yeah, the eyedropper, which is accessed with what key? I. And then when I click and I drag around, I can find let's just pick this purple color from the glasses. Now take a look up here and let me show you what will happen. Some of you will accidentally have the layer mask selected. And if you do, and you click and you drag, no matter what color you're dragging on, what color is it showing? White. Because why? Because we've got the layer mask selected. So anytime it's like, wait, this isn't right, literally say, what is it I'm trying to sample? I'm trying to sample his eyes. Do I have that selected? Do I have the right layer? So if you do, I've got this selected now, and my eyedropper gives me that nice purple. Awesome. So there's a couple things we can easily do. If we want to paint on the background layer, which one should be selected? The background. And now I could either use my brush. What key will make my brush bigger? Yep, brackets. And I could paint that in. That's certainly one option. Go ahead and do that real quick and then undo. So painting would be one simple solution. Okay, just do it so you can practice that, then undo. You could, under the edit menu, you could fill it. So if you choose fill or shift F5 under the edit menu, it'll let you simply choose either the foreground, background, or pick a specific color, or even something like a pattern. Like it gives you some options here. But if I choose foreground color and click fill, it fills it whatever the foreground color is I've chosen. And you see that now that connects really well to the glasses that she's wearing. But let's try a different one. I'm going to switch to my gradient tool. Gradient tool is accessed with what key? The letter G. And when you click on the gradient tool, up here at the top, you see some different options that we have. First is, if you click on the gradient tool here and click to drop down, you'll see options for basics, or they'll have a bunch of pre-made colors. Open up the basics one, because this is the one we'll use most often. Under basics for the gradient, you have either foreground to background color, foreground to transparent, or black to white. So if we just choose foreground to background, and make sure the opacity of our gradient is turned up to 100, I noticed it still looked transparent over here, so I just looked along until I found opacity, pulled that up to 100%. Now you see we've got multiple different types of gradients right here. Let's start with the first one. I'm going to click on that, and it's going to go from the foreground to the background. When you click and you drag, it's going to go from the foreground to the background color. If you click and you drag from any side or angle, you'll see it creates a very different feel. The farther the line that you drag, the farther the gradient will go. Shorter line, shorter gradient. So go draw yourself a nice gradient on there. And you notice by being able to select the color and match it to something in the subject, it actually really connects. Looks good. How's that feel? Okay, you go ahead and try a couple of these others though. This circular gradient or radial gradient, if I turn that on, I click and I make a short line, I get a little tiny gradient. Bigger line, bigger gradient. Bigger line, bigger gradient. What if I wanted it behind her? Click and drag, nice big circle. Actually, I could go even bigger. Now we've got this nice smooth where they're highlighted by purple in the back. Or I could go the opposite way. Start over here. And now we've got the color balanced on this side with what's happening on this side. So you've got lots of choices. Go ahead and try all of those just so you can see some of the different gradient options. This one's kind of fun. Or this one. And just notice, as you click and you drag, they're going to give you different sort of feels. This star gradient's going to be different too. I'm going to go with something like that. But again, do your own thing. How's that feel? Cool? All right, let's take it up a notch though. I'm going to flip over to Google Images. Go ahead and do the same. Flip over to Google Images. And instead of just this gradient background, let's add in a different background. Okay, so I don't know, what do you think here in Google Images? What sort of background would make sense behind this cool urban purple glasses wearing person? Anything? I'm looking to you, creative people. What sort of background would you put behind here instead of color? City, like what? Like New York? Okay, so if we say New York background, as it turns out, that's what the last class said too. Let me show you a quick trick. Pause and look at my screen once you type New York background and you get some search results. Now, of course, remember, we can't just go using this stuff commercially and we can't just go stealing other people's backgrounds. We would either have to download an actual stock footage clip that we can get a license from. There are websites like Envato or others like Unsplash that you can actually get royalty-free images. Internet Source for Visuals, search for free high-resolution photos, New York. So we could do something like that and sign up. There are free options. If we're just doing this for our own purposes right now, nonprofit, just like building something, if I'm trying to use a little background, notice that if I say, okay, this is a cool New York photo, maybe this one. If I click on this, you can see in the corner of it how big this is. This image is 4,900 and some pixels wide by 3,000 tall, but a lot of them are not. In fact, by default, they're going to be any size. So if I clicked on this one's only 1,000 pixels wide, or this one's only 1,000 pixels wide. I'm looking for one that's really small. Some of these are really big. So what I want to point out, okay, this one's only 800 by 450 pixels. So if I copy and paste that into Photoshop, you notice it's a lot smaller because it's tiny compared to this 4,000 pixel wide. Now, could I blow it up? Sure. Put it into transform mode, make it nice and big, but you'll notice what? Whoa. It's going to be pixelated, exactly. So you can see as I stretch that out, all of a sudden you're losing a lot of detail in that. So what the secret is, undo all that, is to come in here to Google, go to Tools. You have to be up at the top to click on Tools, and then you can change size to large. And again, this is just useful for mock-ups. You would need to, if you're doing this for your own commercial use, you'd need to actually go and find these. But now I could come in, and now I see this one is nice and large, 1920 by 1080. Maybe say New York street background. So I'm going to find something that makes sense. Nice little, could have some cool leading lines. This one's pretty big, 4,000 pixels wide. I can copy mine, paste it in. And now I've got my background. If I wanted a different one, I have that option too. Copy, paste. All right, so you have options, but any of these things are going to let us make our own thing. How's that feel? Everybody able to build one? Cool. All right, let's do one more thing though. The colors in this do not connect with the colors of our subject. So I could do a couple of things. One, I could select that background layer and let's add another layer on top of it. So just go click to add a new layer. And let's add a little gradient on top of that. So I hit my G key. That switches me back to gradient. But I don't want, in this case, maybe I don't want purple or the purple that we already selected to white. Maybe I want this background to be the color of these lips. So I'm going to click the background color, come over and sample those lips, and hit OK. So now I have a gradient that goes from the foreground to the background color, from purple to red, and I can use my gradient to try some different feels of this gradient. Maybe I'll go with this one. What's the problem? Well, the gradient. Now that layer covers up our background. So how could we make it to where we can see our background, but we still see a little bit of this gradient color impacting it? We would change what about this layer with the gradient? Huh? The opacity. So I can hit the switch back to my move tool or just grab this opacity and pull it down. And now we've got a background with color influence that pulls from the glasses and the lips. If you turn that eyeball on and off, you can see it makes a huge difference in connecting it to the image. Raise a hand if you need help here. All right, so we've just gone through and we've started with one. We removed a background. We extended the canvas. We started to use gradients and pulling in other images to be able to make that work and be more interesting. Cool. Let's go and look at one more set of things. Let's say, select part of an object and change the color. So under the help menu, hands-on tutorials, I think that was under select and mask, select part of an object and change the color. And I'm going to go ahead and delete all the layers I made. Okay, so go open up under your tutorials, hands-on tutorials, select and mask, select part of an object and change the color, start, do a save as, just like we've done previously, and put it someplace where you want. Select part of image and change color, and save. I'm going to close mine out because I've already got one right here. All right. So all the time when we are working on Photoshop, or if you take a photo at home or with your phone, a lot of times, like most of it nowadays, especially with modern phones, turns out pretty good, but there still could be times where you want to change specifically some colors or sections of the photo. So here's a perfect example of when might want to select, for example, this flower and the blouse or the tank top and change colors for her. So in order to do that, we could, of course, manually come in with this lasso tool, zoom in like crazy, and manually click and drag and try to get them all, couldn't we? That would take forever. I'm not going to do that. We can also make use of, you'll notice that something like the Select Subject tool would grab the whole person. So that's not really what we want either. And it also has an extra challenge. Anytime you've got little wisps of hair, those are very difficult to capture unless you've got a very high resolution image. So you'll notice that that doesn't perfectly capture it either. Deselect with Command D. But in this case, we can use the Quick Selection tool. Sometimes the Object Selection tool would work if it's able to tell what it is. So for example, Object Selection, I could click and drag around, and it actually does a pretty decent job of selecting that object. But you see it also gets some hair and stuff around there too. So there would be a lot of manual cleanup. So in this case, I use Quick Selection. Quick Selection, it's typically you'll want to start kind of towards the center of something. And as you click and you drag out, you'll see it's radiating out and it's trying to find all of those edges. And it looked like it did a brilliant job here. Now we could zoom in to try to make it even more accurate and get some of these pixels, but let's see if we need it here after we get this first thing done. Okay, so our quick selection, everybody get that flower selected? Okay, now I also want to change the color on her tank top. So just like all of other selection tools, they've got the option for new selection, add selection, or subtract. So I typically am going to stay on new selection and then just use my shift key if I want to add some objects to it. So I'm going to grab the tank top here on the front, but you will notice that it actually grabbed, in my case, it grabbed this excess area underneath her arm, this yellow area that I don't want. So what key do I hold down to subtract the selection? Option. And what should I do? How big should my brush be here? Can you see mine? I typically am going to make my brush pretty small so that it just gets rid of the things, you know, typically I want it smaller than the area I'm selecting. If it's too big, then it chops out other stuff. So I'm going to do that. How about for grabbing these spaghetti straps right here? How big should my brush be? Look, tell me larger or smaller. Small, 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 small. And now if I add my shift key, I can grab that spaghetti strap. I could try to get even more close, but I think it probably won't be visible. Minuscule little brush. Okay, good. Now that's probably overkill. But I could come over here, hold my shift key down, and get that other spaghetti strap. So now I have a nice complete selection. Once you've done that, throw me a thumbs up. I'm going to go to my adjustment layers, and there we can change all sorts of things. We can make those black and white. We can change the balance of the color. We could make those a solid color or a pattern. Somebody changed theirs in the last one to a different pattern. You notice you could definitely change the pattern on her dress very easily. So if you wanted to try some different patterns on the dress, very simple, but it doesn't really make sense for this flower. There's also other things like trees, grass, water. You can pick those, and it'll very much change the feel of it. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to add an adjustment layer, and let's maybe do it with the hue and saturation. Hue and saturation lets us change how saturated they are from no color, desaturated, to super saturated. I can grab that hue, move that around. We could try to make these a little more yellow so that they matched the rest of the image. Could make them more red. Purple. We can also take that hue saturation layer and adjust what to dial down the intensity? The opacity. Problem is when you do change the opacity, it also will change the color because now the new color layer is being blended differently with different amounts of opacity with the below layer. But still, you can create a very different feel from orange now to purple. And what if I wanted to remove, like the middle of this flower is getting colored too? What if I wanted to get back to the original flower? Where would I paint and with what color? If I wanted to get back to the original flower and make it not purple. Yep. Select my mask, switch to my brush tool, make it very small. And I could paint with black to get back the center of that flower. So I've switched to black here with as my foreground color, and I'm painting that black in the middle of the flower, and all of a sudden I have the normal flower center, but the outside has changed color. Command 0 will zoom you out. Okay, so you could easily take a picture of yourself. You would not have to be holding a flower. But you could do the exact same thing. Work through the tutorial and then say, okay, I'm going to grab a picture of myself and do this same thing. Sweet. So making selections is huge. We use all these different tools at different times for making different selections. We use eyedropper for selecting different colors. And then we're going to be looking through some of these other tools. We use the brush for painting, both directly on the image and for painting on the mask. And we're going to look at things like the clone stamp tool and the healing tools next time. So I think that'll be a lot of fun. We talked about the gradient tool. We haven't looked at like blur, dodge, and pen tools yet, but we will. The next, I think for next class, you're going through a bunch of the text-based tutorials. Let's see, you did select and mask. Okay, and then you'll have 10 composite tutorials. So before next class, you're going to start to learn about compositing, and then we will apply those things in class. All right. So quick question. Let me stop the recording.